What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be continuing our updated ranking series. Last week, we did the wide receivers and the quarterbacks. This week, we're going to be starting off in this video with the running backs, and later this week, we'll do our tight ends. So we are going to go through my top 30 here for Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. If this is your first time at the channel, we're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of this month. We are very, very close. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you go hit that subscribe button. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these running backs. All right, so as you can see, I got 7 tiers here in today's video, going from the number 1 overall running back all the way down to our 30th overall running back to get through all of these tiers. We're going to kick it off in tier 1. To me, I got 3 guys in this tier. Everybody knows them. It's Jahmyr, Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and yes, I think Ashton Jeanty is also in that tier without taking a single snap in the NFL. When you look at these players, all of these players are 23 years old or younger. Both Gibbs and Bijan averaged 20 plus fantasy points per game last year, which was by far some of the highest numbers in the entire NFL. These are the cornerstone running backs you will build around. These are the guys that are going to be dominating for years and years to come. Jeanty is obviously a little bit more projection than it is any data, but when you look at how he was drafted, you look at the collegiate seasons that he put together there at Boise State, you have to put him here pretty highly, the same way that we did Jahmyr, Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson when they were being drafted into the NFL with that type of draft capital. So let's move on to my tier 2. My tier 2 has 2 players in it. I got Saquon, Barkley, and I have Omarion, Hampton in this tier as well. Saquon, obviously, he's a player when it comes to fantasy points per game. There was nobody better than him last year, but right now at 28 years old, it's hard for me to have him ranked above guys like Jeanty, Bijan, Gibbs. I don't think anybody's really going to argue that. Obviously, if you are a contending roster, he is probably the best running back to have on your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams right now because he's going to score more points most likely than pretty much every other running back in the NFL. This is a very, very good fit for him here in Philly. Last year, that was kind of a debate for some people with Jalen Hurts. Obviously, it proved to be wrong. There's really nothing much more to say about Saquon Barkley, but the reason why he's in the tier below is because of the age. It's about 5 years older, even 7 years older than Jeanty, so you got to move him down there just because of the age cliff and the amount of carries on his body. Now, Omarion Hampton, I have him in this next tier because he is kind of in a tier of his own in the rookie draft for me. He was underneath Jeanty. He was above guys like Henderson, Judkins, all of those other players in this draft. And the reason why is because he got that landing spot there with the Los Angeles Chargers who want to run the football. And analytically, he's one of the better running backs in this class, checking all of the boxes that you want to see from a measurable and an athleticism standpoint. I think right now, obviously, people are going to see Najee Harris there. And I think Najee Harris is going to be involved in his rookie season here for Omarion Hampton. But at the end of the day, this is going to be Hampton's backfield. Talent's going to win out. Cream rises to the top, and I do think Omarion Hampton is going to be a dominant fantasy football asset for a very long time. And so that's why he comes in as my number 5 overall guy here in tier 2, just next to Saquon Barkley. Now let's go to tier 3. Tier 3 to me has a ton of running backs because it feels like the difference between most of these guys is pretty minuscule. I love all of these running backs. I think we can build around all of them in our dynasty leagues, but we're going to kick it off at 6. It's going to be Achane at the top of the tier. I have Breece Hall here, who I have as a buy. TreVeyon Henderson there at 8. Jonathan Taylor at 9. Kyren Williams at 10, who's a buy. Bucky Irving at 11, who I think is a sell. And number 12, Quinshon Judkins. Let's just go through this tier fairly quickly. I think Achane, it speaks for himself. 23 years old, averaged 17.5 fantasy points per game last year. Obviously, he dealt with the Tua injury, which did hurt the efficiencies of Achane, but as long as Tua is healthy, Achane's one of the better running backs in fantasy football, and at 23 years old, you can definitely feel very comfortable with him for the next couple of years. Breece Hall, to me, is a player that I am buying. I know a lot of people are annoyed with Breece Hall at the moment, but he's just 24 years old, about to go into his second contract. You don't really get second contract guys that young in their NFL career. 15.1 fantasy points per game last year on a bad year where he was playing through a knee injury for the majority of 2024. It's hard for me to fade a guy like this. He has the profile that you want to see. He has the proven production at the NFL level. And then even in his bad years, he's averaging 15 plus fantasy points per game. I still have him as a top 7 running back in Dynasty. A lot of people don't like Breece Hall at the moment. They want to fade him. I'd be buying. And I think also when you add a guy like Justin Fields to this offense, the efficiencies of having a running quarterback also add to the efficiencies of having a running back in that backfield. I think it's going going to help Breece Hall a little bit this year. Obviously, he's going to be used on the goal line as well. Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis behind him. They got some run last year when Breece Hurt was a little bit banged up, questionable for missing time. There was even conversations of shutting Breece Hall down. Those guys are fine. They're just handcuffs. They're nothing special. This is Breece Hall's backfield as long as he's healthy and as long as he's here in New York. I think TreVeyon Henderson is a player that's very, very exciting. I have him as my number 8 player. He was, from a talent standpoint, one of my favorite running backs in the entire class. He has juice, the ability to break off 50, 60, 70-yard runs from anywhere on the football field. I think he's going to be a really good fit here in New England. I want to see them kind of phase out a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. That's going to make him a little bit risky at first. Obviously, we want to see Henderson get more of the workload, but I also think he's the type of guy, kind of like Jahmyr Gibbs, where even if he's getting 10, 11, 12 touches in a football game, he could still score 15 or 20 fantasy points per game just based off of how electric he is with the football in his hands. So I really like TreVeyon Henderson, and I would be drafting him as a top 8 guy in my startups. Jonathan Taylor and Kyren Williams, I'm going to bunch them together. Obviously, these are proven producers at the NFL level. 26 years old for Jonathan Taylor, 24, almost 25 years old for Kyren Williams. Both of these guys averaged about 17 to 17 and a half fantasy points per game last year. I think these guys are going to continue to be the running back ones for their offense. I think they're going to continue to be bell cowed in a way that's going to be very valuable for fantasy football. And despite some of the added competition behind those guys in like Giddens and Jarquez Hunter, I don't anticipate those players taking a ton away from these two guys as long as they're healthy. Now, I have Kyren Williams as a buy because Jarquez Hunter, Blake Corum, a lot of these guys are getting a lot of buzz on the internet right now. Right now, Kyren Williams is the guy. He's always been the guy for the most part. And it's funny because I think when we're talking up guys like Jarquez Hunter and when we're talking up guys like Blake Corum, everybody goes to Sean McVay because Sean McVay loves to talk about the running backs that he's drafting. He just loves the running back project. When he talks up those players, he always says they remind me of Kyren Williams. And I think that's funny because when it comes to the type of coach speak they are getting, they're being told that they are like Kyren Williams, who Kyren Williams to Sean McVay is the top of the top. He wants them to be like Kyren Williams. So as long as he has Kyren Williams on the team, why the fuck would he go away from him? To me, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. I think Kyren Williams is going to be dominant again this year. He keeps getting the fade every single season and he keeps producing. Kyren Williams is a top 10 guy for me and a buy. Let's go to Bucky Irving because that's the elephant in the room. I think a lot of people are going to be very upset about this ranking, and honestly, I don't really care. At the end of the day, when I see Bucky Irving, I'm selling him because so many people have this very, very high ranking for Bucky Irving right now. But I'm looking at this grouping of guys that we have in this tier. Bucky Irving had 14.4 fantasy points per game last year, which was by far the lowest of anybody in this tier, including a Breece Hall who did play through that knee injury. Yes, you can say that Bucky Irving didn't really get the starting job until about week 5 or 6. That's when it looked like he kind of made the official switch over to Bucky Irving in the first part. But also, when you look at the back half of the year, I think it's recency bias. Bucky Irving played really well. It was the easiest part of their schedule. They were playing against the Carolina Panthers defense, some other defenses that were very soft against fantasy football running backs. And what I think a lot of people are forgetting is Rachaad White was very banged up. He had dealt with a back injury, a hip injury, and a leg injury late in that part of the year, and he was virtually phased out of the offense, and I don't think that was because of play. Yes, Rachaad White has been inefficient, but I also think it was the majority of Rachaad White is hurt, and he doesn't really feel good to play football, and we know we are a team that is going to be playing in the playoffs here in just a couple weeks. We're not going to have Rachaad White out on the football field and keep him getting banged up because we need him to be involved in this offense as well. Now, that said, this is still Bucky Irving's offense. I think Bucky Irving is the 1A in this backfield, but Rachaad White isn't going anywhere. This may be his last year there in Tampa Bay. He's kind of hinted at that already because he's going to be a free agent at the end of the following year, but I still think Rachaad White is going to get carries. I still think he's going to be used in the receiving game and he can be used on the goal line. Bucky Irving is overvalued to me because of that. He's also a day 3 guy, which I know I just said Kyren Williams has proven it over and over and over again. If Bucky Irving comes out and proves it again next year, obviously he'll go up the ranks, but right now, 1 year sample size, a banged up Rachaad White last year, I'm pumping the brakes a tiny bit, and I wouldn't mind moving a guy like Bucky Irving for a Kyren Williams, for a Breece Hall, because I think that there's plenty of people in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues who will give you a plus on top of Kyren or Breece just to go upgrade, quote unquote, to Bucky Irving. So that's something that I would be doing in my own personal Dynasty rankings. But at the end of the day, I think you can order this tier. The reason why it's in tiers is you can order it however you want. I don't think the difference is massive between these guys. I said it at the beginning of the tier. I'm just selling Bucky Irving, and I think those are the reasons why I'm just a little bit more cautious with Bucky Irving. Hopefully you guys understand that. At the end of the day, the last player in this tier, Quinshon Judkins, very talented running back, 21 years old. He's going to the Cleveland Browns. He's going to be at the back of this tier because I don't know how efficient the Cleveland Browns are going to be this year, but he should be the 1A. I know they got Dylan Sampson. Quinshon Judkins is going to be very, very good as well. I like him a lot. He's still a top 12 Dynasty running back in my rankings. Now, we spent a lot of that time on that tier. That is is kind of the top 12. Let's go to tier 4. I have 4 players in this tier. We're going to go with James Cook. I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs. RJ Harvey is sitting here at 15, and 16 is Christian McCaffrey. This is a very interesting tier to me. A lot of these players a little bit older. James Cook going to be 26 years old, 16.7 fantasy points per game last year, maybe holding out because of a contract. I don't think he actually holds out. A lot of these running backs talk like they will, and then they never do. I think Cook gets the contract from the Buffalo Bills. Still a player that's going to put up these low-end RB1 numbers, high-end RB2 numbers, and somebody that we should be very comfortable with. And like I said, I think that contract is coming, which will probably move him up the rankings for a lot of people. Josh Jacobs, 27 years old, had a really good year last year for the Green Bay Packers, averaged 17 fantasy points per game, which was more than Kyren Williams, which was about as much as Jonathan Taylor. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to Josh Jacobs, there was nobody else in that backfield. Their third-round pick, Marshawn Lloyd, he got injured. A.J. Dillon wasn't really playing football last year. There was nobody else getting touches. This year, Lloyd is supposed to be healthy. We'll see what happens. I kind of liked him last year as a player in that weaker running back class, but at the end of the day, I do think he will be a little bit more involved this year. Not that it's going to knock Jacobs. He's still going to be a fantastic play and somebody you should be comfortable with. Harvey is somebody who is very interesting. I'm higher on Harvey than I think consensus is right now. I think that Sean Payton Joker role is going to be very valuable. This is a player who I liked analytically in the pre-draft process. I didn't foresee him getting second-round draft capital, but he did to probably the best running back landing spot in all of Dynasty fantasy football with the Denver Broncos. So I really like RJ Harvey, the draft capital, the landing spot, the analytics. It backs it up. I'm willing to just place a bet on RJ Harvey, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think we have a rookie running back here who might even outproduce some of the guys above him as a rookie in his first season. He could outproduce Quinshon Judkins. He could outproduce TreVeyon Henderson. And I would not be surprised if that happens. So I'm very excited about RJ Harvey. We'll see how this year goes. Christian McCaffrey, 29 years old, older for the running back. Last year, very down year. Obviously, missed the majority of the year with the Achilles tendonitis. Then when he got healthy, came back, started getting some reps, got a knee injury, sidelined him for the rest of 2024. Basically a lost year for Christian McCaffrey. I think right now for me with Christian McCaffrey, he's a player that I'm willing to gamble on if I'm a contending roster because people are really out on CMC. And I think for good reason. However, the Achilles tendonitis is something that I am not worried about. His own teammate, George Kittle, got stem cells, did the Achilles tendonitis thing. It was not even a story at that point in time when George Kittle was doing it. You can go back on YouTube, type in Achilles tendonitis, stem cells, George Kittle. You can go find the interview that George Kittle did. I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be fine in that department. Obviously, the wear and tear on the body, the knee injuries, the ankle injuries, all of those things that can happen when you get older. I think that is definitely something that we can be worried for. But at the end of the day, they want to use the hell out of Christian McCaffrey. They paid him to use the hell out of him. He's going to be fine, I think, from the Achilles standpoint. Gonna get the receptions. He's gonna get the goal line work. He's gonna get the majority of the workload. I just think I'm willing to make this bet on Christian McCaffrey for 1 or 2 more years as a contending roster. Even if he loses a little bit of the juice, the receiving upside is still there. So I do like Christian McCaffrey here. Let's move on to my tier 5. Tier 5, I have 3 players in it. This is a weird tier for me. It's gonna be Kenneth Walker. I'm also gonna have Chase Brown. I'm also gonna have Caleb Johnson. I don't really know what to make of this tier, really. Kenneth Walker, 25 years old going into the season this year, averaged 16 fantasy points per game last year. You have a second-round running back in Zach Charbonnet who looked good when he got touches. There have been some potential trade rumblings of Kenneth Walker this offseason. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it feels very much like he maybe not be the guy that is going to be the full-time future for the Seahawks, and they may have Zach Charbonnet a little bit more involved than we want him to be for fantasy football purposes and make this more of a split backfield. Gives me a little bit of worry for him. I think that reason is why I'm selling him. There are people who are still very high on Kenneth Walker, and I would definitely be willing to move him if people are still high on him in my leagues, just because I'm a little bit more risk averse with a guy like Kenneth Walker with all of these rumblings happening around him at the moment. Chase Brown is also a player that I'm selling. 25 years old. He averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game last year, and he was very good down the stretch when there was nobody else on the roster to get touches. Now, people are going to tell you there's still nobody else on the roster. However, I do want to mention that last year, his average yards per attempt dropped by nearly 50% in games that he had 10 or more carries. So we heard it throughout multiple times last year where Chase Brown was not supposed to be the bell cow. They didn't want to treat him like the bell cow. And then when he was treated like the bell cow out of circumstance, his efficiency numbers dropped pretty significantly. Now he can still go out there and get that Rachaad White type of usage where he's not super efficient, but he's getting a ton of workload where he's getting the receiving work, he's getting the goal line work, he's getting the other work. It's going to be fine, I think, for him. So if you want to take a shot on Chase Brown, Brown, totally fine with it. He's more of a soft sell for me than he is a hard sell. And I will also admit, I am a little bit of a fan of Taj Brooks here. I think Taj Brooks is being very slept on. I think he's going to be a very good complement to a guy like Chase Brown. Zach Moss will be healthier again this year. Just taking a little bit of it away, he can still be super efficient. But if people are still viewing Chase Brown as back half of last year's type of Chase Brown, where he's getting 25 carries, he's getting a ton of the work, I don't know if that exists right now. Not to say he can't be good. Like I said, I still think he can be good, but I'm probably selling him in my Dynasty leagues high if people still believe he's that type of player. And then Caleb Johnson, he gets a little bit later draft capital than we thought he was going to get, but he goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's going to fit into that Najee Harris role. They're still going to use Jalen Warren, but Caleb Johnson should be very good. Over here with Arthur Smith, you know, anything can happen for running backs, but I like him still. Top 5 running back in my rankings from this year's rookie class, and overall, I think he's a top 20 running back in Dynasty startup rankings as well. Let's go to tier 6. Tier 6 is going to be a little bit of older players, very good players for contending rosters to add to their rosters, but in a startup, their rankings are probably lower because of the age attached to these guys. 20 is going to be Derrick Henry, 21 is going to be Chuba Hubbard, 22 Joe Mixon, 23 David Montgomery, 24 Alvin Kamara. That's the entire tier for me. A lot of these players are 28, 29, 30, 31 years old. Derrick Henry being the oldest, obviously last year averaged 19.8 fantasy points per game. Still think he can do that in Baltimore. Still think he's going to be used very heavily, but I know people say it every year. 31, 32, 33 years old. It's getting very, very scary. He's already an outlier as is for Derrick Henry, but he's still going to be good until he's not. The thing is, I'm not drafting him very highly in my startups. That's why you see him here number 20 in my rankings. Chuba Hubbard is very interesting. 26 years old, had a career year there with Dave Canales last season. Jonathan Brooks not there. They add Rico Dowdle, which I do think is going to be a little bit of an involvement this year from him as the 1B in this offense, maybe just a 2 behind Chuba Hubbard. He's an interesting player. There is a chance that you could be selling Chuba high if people still believe in him. However, I don't think he has the name value to sell high. That's why you don't see the sell next to his name in my rankings, but still a player that I think we can view as an RB2 pretty safely this year for our Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, because quite honestly, Dave Canales loves to use these types of running backs, and we saw him do it last year, so I still think you can have confidence with Chuba. Joe Mixon I have as a buy. He's 28 years old. He's going to be going into his 29-year-old season. People are kind of fading him as well. People like Woody Marks for some reason. I think Woody Marks can be fine as a complementary piece in this backfield. They didn't really have anybody other than Dameon Pierce last year and a washed up Cam Akers. But last year when Joe Mixon was healthy, he averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game. This is an offense that doesn't have the sexiest offensive line. It hasn't been very good, but they are going to use the hell out of Joe Mixon. He's a usage play, and I think he's very undervalued. I'm higher than consensus. That's why I have him as a buy in 22. I think a lot of other rankings have him even lower, 24, 25, 26, depending on where you're looking, but I think he can be bought for a contending roster fairly cheap, and I would definitely be doing that if I'm a contending roster as well. David Montgomery, 28 years old. It's going to be interesting to see how the offense changes a tiny bit without Ben Johnson there. I think it's going to be somewhat consistent, but there is going to be a little bit of change. Dan Campbell is a very big David Montgomery fan, so he's probably still going to get some goal line work, and the touchdown upside gives you some confidence with him as well. And then Alvin Kamara, 30 years old. The Saints offense looks putrid. I don't know how this team is going to not have the #1 overall pick in 2025. I think they're going to be the worst team in football. That's just my opinion. Alvin Kamara may not make it on this roster through the trade deadline. He might get traded before it's all said and done, but he averaged 19 fantasy points per game last year. The best thing for Alvin Kamara is probably not being a New Orleans Saint anymore. Kellen Moore does make it a little bit interesting because he does like to use the running backs a little bit. And although Alvin Kamara was the second highest scorer of anybody in this tier last year, I just think the offensive situation, the New Orleans Saints situation, is just something that is so bad that I really don't want a part of it. And now let's go into my last tier, tier 7. I got a total of, I think, 6 guys in this tier to round it out. Got Isaiah Pacheco, who I have as a buy, Brian Robinson Jr., Travis Etienne, who I have as a buy, Cam Scatabo, James Conner, and Tyrone Tracy Jr. Let's kick it off with Pacheco. Look, they only added Brashard Smith in the NFL draft, and yes, I do like Smith. I think Smith is going to be a good complement in this backfield. I think he's going to be better than Kareem Hunt. I think he'll be better than guys like Carson Steele, even Elijah Mitchell, who they added this offseason. But at the end of the day, Pacheco is the best and the most talented runner in this backfield, and I think they're going to use him the remainder of his contract here for the Chiefs. Last year, he dealt with injury. It was a bad year for him from an injury standpoint, but I think this year, a little bit healthier, more usage, he's going to be fine, and I think he's a buy for contenders at 26 years old. Now, Brian Robinson Jr. is another another guy who didn't get a lot of talent added into the backfield. We've talked about Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt as a potential dart throw, a very deep UDFA type of ad for your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. I still think he's interesting, but B-Rob should get the workload at the beginning of the year, and it's going to be his job to keep if he wants it. So I think he's a player that we can keep going. Obviously, we talked about the efficiencies of the rushing quarterback with Breece Hall and Justin Fields. That happens with Jaden Daniels and a guy like Brian Robinson. You still have Austin Eckler there, but as an RB2, maybe a flex running back 3 type of option, I think B-Rob is more than fine. ETN's a player that has been faded into oblivion. I am much higher than consensus on ETN. I think most rankings, if you look at Keep Trade Cut, he's like 35 or something like that. There's other rankings where people don't even have him as a top 36 option. I think that's blasphemy. I don't agree with that. He's 26 years old. Last year was a bad year. He dealt with some injury. 8.7 fantasy points per game. It's not good, but you get Liam Cohen here. I understand that people are very infatuated with Bashal Tutin. I think Tutin, we need to recognize that he's still a day 3 guy. He's a speedy type of player, and Travis Etienne still can be involved in this offense, even with Bashal Tutin being involved or Tank Bigsby being involved. And I think Liam Cohen can make Travis Etienne hyper efficient again in an offense like this. This is an upgraded offense all around. Obviously, the play callers, you get Travis Hunter in here as well. I think that Travis Etienne is going to be one of the better buys, one of the savviest buys, that people are just going to do it, and it's going to feel gross, and people are going to tell you, why would you buy Travis Etienne? I think that that's the best thing to do right now. And even if Travis Etienne is not a Jacksonville Jaguar in 12 months from now, there's no way that he's not being involved in an offense somewhere else as well. I think he's one of those types of players that can be involved no matter where he goes. There was some trade rumors. They elected to keep him on the roster. I think that should speak some volume as well. Let's just buy Travis Etienne, plug your nose, try not to vomit when you do it. I promise you'll probably come out on top at the end of the year. I've seen him go for very, very cheap, and he's somebody that I'd be willing to take the risk on. A former first-round guy, I'd be willing to take the risk on him. Cam Scatterbo and Tyrone Tracy, I'm going to bunch them together. I prefer Cam. I think Tyrone Tracy is going to be very involved this year. Both of these guys, you know, are kind of the 1-2 punch, I think, for the New York Giants moving forward. I'm going to be very excited to see how Jackson Dart makes this offense move with Malik Neighbors there as well. I think Cam is most likely to get the goal line touches and get those touchdowns, which is going to be very valuable for fantasy. I think Tyrone Tracy probably gets more of the receiving work. Like I said, this is truly a 1A, 1B scenario for me. I think Scatterbo just over Tracy, but not by a lot. If Tracy's significantly discounted in your league compared to Scatterbo, I'd probably just go Tracy at the cheaper cost, because it's probably going to be 55-45, maybe 60-40 in favor of Cam Scatterbo by the end of the year. James Conner is the last player that I want to talk about. He's 29 in my rankings. He's 30 years old. I just couldn't do a top 30 without James Conner on it. Obviously, Trey Benson is a player that we've liked on the channel. I think he can take a step forward in year 2, but Conner averaged 16 fantasy points per game last year. He has been used so heavily by Jonathan Gannon in this offense. I think he's a player that still has some juice left in the tank, kind of like guys like David Montgomery, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara. The window is going to be very small for this guy in James Conner, but he's going to be getting a majority of the workload. We've seen him get the receiving work, the touchdowns, the goal line, all of that stuff. James Conner cannot be left off of this list because, quite frankly, this year would not be surprised if he's a top 15 running back when it's all said and done, and you can get him right now in your Dynasty leagues as running back 29. So contenders, you probably should be buying. There you have it, folks. That is my top 30 running backs for Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues right now as of May 27th, 2025. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you haven't watched them already, I did do the quarterbacks and the wide receivers last week, so you can check those videos out now at the end of this video. If you liked this video, make sure you hit the like button. Also, make sure you guys are subscribed. That way you don't miss any future content. And last but not least, make sure you go join our Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams 24/7, 365. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you in our next episode. But until then, peace out.